And if you would, please indicate whether you're present in person, remote from the district, or remote from office. Thank you.
Senator Alvarado.
Present remotely from my district.
Thank you. Senator Berg.
Present remotely from my district.
Thank you. Senator Carroll. Senator Storm. Representative Bowling. Representative Frazier.
Present in the room.
Representative Gibbons-Prunty.
Present in the room.
Representative Sheldon. Representative Weber. Representative Westrom.
Present in the room.
Representative Wilner.
Here in the 35th House District.
Thank you. Senator McDaniel. Representative Petrie. Representative Reed. Representative Moser. Co-Chair Bentley.
Here in the room.
Chair Meredith.
Present in the room. Before we proceed with the formal agenda, just a personal point of order here. I'd like to acknowledge the passing of Senator Tom Buford yesterday. I'm sure most folks are aware of that, and Tom certainly was a valuable member of our caucus, and he'll be sorely missed. And if you would, I'd ask you to join with me in a moment of silence, remembering his family, Carol, his wife, and children, Stephanie and Mo, and their grandchildren. So if you would, please bow with me. Thank you. Next, we have approval of the minutes from the June 2nd meeting. Do I hear a motion? Motion by Representative Prunty, seconded by co-chair. All those in favor vote aye. All opposed vote no. Motion carried. Thank you. Before we begin with the presentations for members participating remotely, please remember to mute your microphones. And this morning we're going to get updates on funding for social workers in the Department of Community-Based Services for Commissioner Miranda Straub and her staff. And this issue has been part of the budget discussions in the past, so this is kind of like deja vu all over again. So Commissioner and other presenters are here. Please come forward and identify yourself for the record.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Senator. I'm Marta Miranda Straub. Thank you all for the invitation for our staff to present to you. Thank you for caring about our child welfare workers and the children and youth in our community. We have a presentation prepared for you that hopefully will give you the understanding of where we are and where we want to go and where we're going to need your support. Lisa Dennis, who is our Deputy Commissioner, will be presenting the first part of this presentation.
Appreciate that, and we're going to keep this very structured today because we have a lot of committee meetings going on, and we're going to try to conclude this by 11:30. So I'm allocating 30 minutes to each of these presentations plus questions. Yeah. So members, if you would, please hold your questions until after the presentations. I think that'll help us go a little bit smoother. So, ladies, again, if you identify yourself for the record, feel free to proceed. Excuse me. Is your mic on?
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning. Again, my name is Lisa Dennis, and I am the Deputy Commissioner with the Department for Community-Based Services. Again, we want to say thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and present on the department's staffing challenges and discuss what is needed to be able to build capacity to serve the citizens of the Commonwealth. Dcbs is responsible for delivering services to families to prevent the disruption of the family unit and reduce poverty and adult and child maltreatment throughout the state. The delivery of essential services for families and children, excuse me, are designed to protect individuals from abuse, neglect, and exploitation with safety, permanency, and self-sufficiency as the paramount goals. As you can see in the right-hand corner on the slide, the state is divided into 9 service regions, and in those 9 service regions, we have at least one office located in all 120 counties with over 4,300 full-time employees. This slide looks at the number of children in out-of-home care. In June of 2021, DCBS had 9,122 children in out-of-home care, which is a decrease of 925 from approximately a year ago. Kentucky was an early implementer of the federal legislation known as Family First Prevention Services Act, which allows public child welfare agencies for the first time to access federal funding for prevention in-home services. This was funding that was traditionally utilized for foster care, guardianship, and adoption assistance. One of the anticipated outcomes with the shift in funding and practice was to see a decrease in the number of children out of home care. As Kentucky continues to invest in prevention services, we anticipate to see this downward trend continue and more children and families served within their communities with in-home services. This slide looks at our Child Protective Services intakes for the calendar year of 2020. As you can see from the slide, our agency received right at 114,000 intakes during the calendar year of 2020. And if you will look at the third column, you will see that right at 90,000 of those intakes involved allegations of child abuse and neglect. And the fourth column shows that of those approximately 90,000 intakes involving allegations of child abuse and neglect, that right at 45,000 were accepted, which means they met acceptance criteria, and our staff responded and made contact with families and completed an assessment. And then from that 45,000 approximately, the last two columns shows the number of referrals that resulted in a finding, either substantiation or services needed. The last column just breaks that apart and shows the number of substantiated referrals as alone. And what is important to note with regards to these last two columns is that the majority of these assessments with a finding resulted in a case being open for ongoing case management by our staff, either an in-home services case or an out-of-home care case. The department is focused on, excuse me again, in addition to assessing for safety and risk, which is what our staff does with every interaction with families and children, they are also focused on placement stability and the best placement possible. And when we're talking about the best placement possible, it's more than just a home for a child. It's looking for a home or a placement for a child that best meets their identified treatment needs. DCBS also continues to focus on recruitment and retention of qualified staff to maintain manageable caseloads. And we also know that the quality services to children and families is dependent on valued and experienced staff. This slide looks at our average CPS caseloads. We know that caseloads are, we can look at caseloads a variety of different ways, but the column that most accurately represents the experience of our frontline caseload carrying social workers is the last column, the purple column. That column includes all of our current cases. It includes any past due case assignments, and then we divide those total caseloads, case counts, by the number of staff that we have available to carry a case. At any given time, the department has a number of staff that we consider as not at full capacity. These are staff that are not available to carry a caseload. They are new staff that are in training. They are staff that are on extended medical leave. They may be on desk duty, etc. So to give an accurate reflection of what caseloads look like and are experienced by our staff, we remove those staff from the calculation to get our average. Currently, as of June, our average caseload for our frontline caseload carrying staff is 25. But also we would note that the Council on Accreditation and other national child welfare agencies recommend a caseload between 15 and 18. So we still have a ways to go to get to that level. I would also note here with regards to caseloads, this is a statewide average. So depending on what area of the state that a worker is located in, their experience could look different. For example, the average caseload in Jefferson is closer to 40. Fayette's around approximately 30. Campbell County and Davis County, again, are around 29 and 30. So again, depending on where staff are located, their experience could look different. This is the statewide average. And I would note just one other thing with regards to caseload numbers. When looking at caseloads, we need to keep in mind the complexity of the cases because each case looks different. Currently, workers are managing all types of cases, low or lower risk cases, as well as high risk and very complex cases, as well as in-home, out-of-home care. So again, each case looks different and has to be considered with regards to its needs and complexity. This slide looks at turnover within DCBS for 2020. The first column identifies the DCBS department overall, as well as each of the 9 service regions. And then we have 2 columns. One is with internal transfers, and then one is without. Internal transfers counted by the personnel cabinet are seen as a positive change, which is a positive change for a local team or a county, but for the department overall, it doesn't really change our staffing numbers if a worker moves from Anderson County to Bullitt County. So the last column is a more accurate account of turnover. And the other thing I would note here with regards to turnover is this is all positions. So this is everything. This is your frontline caseload carrying social workers. This is your frontline non-caseload carrying social workers. It is your support staff, secretarial staff, your supervisors, regional management, etc. This is all staff in each of these calculations. So you'll also note that Jefferson at 21% is our county with the highest rate of turnover in all positions. The other thing would note with regards to turnover is the tenure of our staff. Our workforce is a very young workforce at this point. Currently, 44% of our DCBS caseload carrying and social workers are in the job classification of a social services worker 1, which is the entry-level position. To qualify for a social service worker 1 position, you have to have a social work degree or a degree in a related field, and no experience is required. A social worker can be reclassified to a social service worker 2 once they have 1 year of experience, and we have approximately 19 to 20% of our frontline caseload carrying social workers within that classification. So around 63-64% of your frontline caseload carrying staff are very young in their tenure and experience. This slide looks at exit survey data that we've collected from 2019 to 2021. These are the top reasons identified by staff as to why they are leaving DCBS. And those are better job outside of state government, retirement, insufficient pay, too many cases, lack of promotional opportunities, etc. This slide identifies some of the systemic themes identified as part of our safety analysis debriefing process of 218 child fatality, near fatality cases between October 2019 and September of 2020. And it reiterates some of the things that we have discussed in the previous slides here today. The top 4 systemic issues identified as part of the review process related to the staffing demands and experience levels of staff, caseload demands, management of different levels of complexity of cases, and retention of staff and being able to fill vacancies timely. And just as of a note here, there was 218 cases reviewed, but some of them had more than one identified systemic issue. So if you total the columns across the bottom, it will be greater than 218. But again, these the top 4 themes related to issues of staffing and needed capacity for infrastructure within DCBS. And now I'll turn it over to the Commissioner.
Thank you, Lisa. What we've done is identify the needs of the agency, really begin to assess where we need to modernize, where we need to redesign, and what our gaps, not only in services, but in capacity is. So we have developed pillars to build a 21st century DCBS. And the challenge for our child welfare workers is the continuous exposure to multiple traumatic events, high-risk positions, very similar to police and EMS, toxic stress, from toxic stress to burnout to vicarious trauma and to compassion fatigue, all of which at one point or another in this continuum end up in the experience of secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, where our staff experience the same symptoms as the traumatized clients that they work with. The quality of service is diminished when that happens. Our capacity is lowered to provide the services that our families need. We have a difficult time retaining employees, and we have a high turnover. Actually, the national statistics, without institutional support or care for advocates or child welfare workers working directly with trauma on the front line, is about 18 months, and we're right there. So our turnover is high. That creates a problem of capacity for us and for our families. Trauma, the experience of trauma and secondary trauma, the first trigger for that worker is the desire to leave work, to flight from the situation. Next. So we've implemented a safety model, and this is a practice used in child welfare, is best practice to assist, as a tool to assist the worker in making decisions about the safety and risk at multiple points in the case, not just when we receive the case or when there's a critical incident. So this is a tool to help our workers make decisions. So that is a new model that we have instituted. Next. We think that, yes, the council is right, 15 to 18 cases per worker when with the severity of the clients that we see is accurate. However, the severity of those cases vary, and when our workers are inexperienced, that creates a problem. So what we want to do is create an alternative response to be able to go from traditional investigation, I'm not going to read to you, but look at the traditional investigation to an alternative response. So non-incident based, an assessment of the strengths as well as the formal determination of whether maltreatment occurred or not. And with that, a differential assignment of cases. So it's not only the amount needs to be reduced, therefore the need for more workers, but the severity of the cases need to decide how many cases folks can take. So we would like to have the less experienced workers have the less traumatic, severe cases, and then hire clinical experts on complex trauma to be able to have smaller caseloads with the most traumatized families, children and youth, and to act as content experts for the younger, less experienced workers. Next. So here are the phases that Dcbs has engaged in since I became commissioner on July 1st. Phase 1, we developed a stabilization. We turned on a dime, like all of you, during COVID. What do we need to do to stabilize? What worked that we want to keep? What didn't work that we need to stop doing? Then we just finished doing our phase 2, which is an 18-month strategic plan that deals with how are we going to design services with the lived client experience in mind? How are we going to decrease barriers and increase access? And then that will be evaluated over the next year. And then all of that will be integrated into what we're calling our 21st century 3-year strategic plan. It is important to note that in this process, we have recruited our own existing and alumni families and youth, as well as Frontline and every level, 25 members of Dcbs representing every level and every region. So it's been a joint collaboration with our clients for them to tell us their lived experience, hold those accountable, and with Frontline staff, as well as leadership and community leaders. Thanks. So here are the pillars for Dcbs. Equity, we're looking at poverty, which is, economic support. And how do we dismantle poverty, and how do we differentiate poverty from neglect? They're not the same. Also looking at racial disparities, which we have, everybody has, and we now have gotten the cosmic 2x4 that we need to really assess how we make sure that everyone that we serve has the same service, quality of service and access to us. The second is trauma, resilience, and engaged healings. This is the secondary trauma piece for our own staff. and then the trauma that our clients experience. So we begin with us, building capacity, strength, support, organizational policy and process for our staff, and then being able to do trauma-informed care with all of our children and youth. So instead of what did you do that is what's happened to you. So it's a more collaborative and engaged conversation. Our third pillar is families, children, and youth. All families, from bio families to foster families to fictive kin. And the fourth is health and wellness. So we're looking at behavioral health, mental health, and the opioid crisis. And the fifth one is really that systemic and structural piece that we are redesigning as a backbone for Dcbs. How do we implement, how do we evaluate, and how do we create systemic and structural changes so we don't keep putting a Band-Aid on the heart attack? For example, turnover. Next. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking fast, not only because I'm Cuban, but because I know we have limited time. So we want to, our vision is to build a robust virtual and in-person workforce. On July 11th, we began to add a lot more in-person meetings, accessibility to all of our clients across the state, as well as we're looking at reinforcing what we learned from COVID, which is that our folks really do a great job. We actually served 70,000 more people in SNAP. We answer calls in 3 to 7 minutes as opposed to 30. We answered 1,000 calls as opposed to 500. Our error rate has decreased. So we have lots of benefits that we've learned. A robust virtual workforce and an in-person workforce is really what will work best for us. And now we implemented that on July 11th, and we will continue to evaluate. Our goal is to continue to reduce brick and mortar, since a certain percentage of our staff can do their work virtually, or staff can rotate. So for example, if I just had a critical incident, I had a gun to my head, I had to remove a child with cigarette burns on their back, etc., I can step back and work from home the next week or two while I recalibrate, and then a new team will come in and staff the in-person office. So we really are working at adding all kinds of interventions across the way. We will have open concepts, so folks can come in with their laptop, plug in. They will not have a permanent office other than when privacy is needed for working with a family or performance evaluations. So we have open concept desk where folks can come in, plug in their laptop, make copies, speak with a supervisor, and go back and see families in their own home or go back to their office at home. We're working on a work-life balance. You know how important that is. So lots of flexibility. And then moving into revise and modernize all the physical components of Dcbs and become a living example of who we are as an agency and what we do and what we value. Next. So budget requests, I just want to give you an update. In 2022, we requested for the governor, and the governor recommended a structural piece for us, which is the internal infrastructure around training, supervision, secondary trauma, debriefing groups, etc., as well as adding 50 to 70 additional social workers that will be those highly skilled clinical social workers that can support our young staff while they have cases, and be able to have the more complex cases for those who are more clinically, have the clinical expertise to manage that. So we're finalizing a plan for the $20 million that was awarded to us for prevention. And we have Krista Bell here who can answer our primary and secondary prevention. We will come back to you during the session and ask for designing a division of primary and secondary reporting directly to the commissioner's office, because we need to stop just having family when they have exhausted their resources and are in dire crisis. We need to catch folks upstream. So we're moving towards a primary and secondary. We'll always do tertiary. We're ER, triage, take care of who comes in bleeding. However, we need to get ahead of the curve and begin to do a primary and secondary intervention. We've been very successful with Family First, and with Sky doing the secondary and primary information. So we're finalizing that plan on a child welfare prevention plan, as well as we're in the process of developing our 2023 budget request. So now Christabel, Lisa Dennis, and I are available for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. It's very concise and to the point. Probably this agenda could have been entitled Deja Vu all over again, because I think the three groups that are presenting today also presented 2 years ago when formulating the budget. So here we are again. And we will open for questions. And if you don't mind, I'll start with your slide number 3, which deals with the number of children in custody. You're showing a drop from 10,000 to 9,000. Is that COVID?
Again, I think that relates. We implemented Family First Prevention Services Act, and part of that plan and implementation was looking at how to provide services in home and to reduce those out of home care numbers. And we think the department thinks that the implementation of Family First has led to our decrease in number of children out of home care. However, we do acknowledge that COVID was an impact, and that we can't say for certainty that it was all Family First in our increased efforts around prevention and in-home services. We're continuing to monitor our data, and as we are seeing referrals trend back upward, we are not seeing the out-of-home care numbers trending the same way. So which makes us inclined to believe that our intervention around Family First are being successful. And we know that of those families that are served with in-home services, that 93 to 94% of those children remain in the home and do not come into out-of-home care.
Well, even with that decline, obviously we've seen a pretty steep increase since 2015.
Yes, we have.
I'm speculating, but is that, you think, drug-related?
There are a number of factors that have increased.
Can you give me the top 2?
Krista may have that readily available. I don't have it with me.
Let's move to slide number 1. On your overview, you said you're responsible for delivering services to families to prevent the disruption of the family unit and reduce poverty in adults and child maltreatment throughout the state. How do you measure success? How are we achieving that? Because it's easy to look at your previous slide and say, well, we've seen a pretty steep increase here, so maybe we're not being successful, maybe we're not focusing on the right areas. So again, how do we measure success and know that the dollars we're investing, we're in fact seeing a return?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. I'm Christabel. I'm an executive advisor with the Dcbs Commissioner's Office. With the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act, it has allowed us for the first time ever to draw down federal dollars or federal reimbursement at a 50% rate for those prevention services that we know are successful in keeping children safely at home with their families. So we just implemented that in October of 2019. So we are less than 2 years into that. But as Lisa Dennis said, we are seeing success with that. And so last state fiscal year, we invested an additional $6 million in prevention services. And in return, we saw a $15 million savings in out-of-home care services. And that state fiscal year, of course, ended in June of 2020, which was very early in the pandemic. So we think that there were not impacts of the pandemic in what we saw there. And so we think that our expanded prevention services have been successful and will continue to be successful. So those evidence-based practices under Family First are how we are preventing children coming into care, preventing future maltreatment, and really leveraging that to move upstream to primary and secondary prevention. So providing services to families even before abuse and neglect can occur. So we are really anxious to see what the data says about this most recent state fiscal year that just ended last week. And also we have plans, as the commissioner advised, to expand those prevention services and evidence-based practices even further in the next state fiscal year with the availability of additional funding. And so we're really eager to see the impact that we're going to have on families in the next state fiscal year as well.
Can you elaborate on that $15 million savings that you alluded to?
Sure. So we have the data, as I said, prior to implementation of Family First, our funding for prevention services for those intensive in-home services to families was very limited. We had waiting lists, even though the services that we were able to provide through those contracts were very successful, between 93 and 96%. They were very limited. And in most parts of the state, we had waiting lists for those services. So when we were able to leverage additional federal funding beginning in October of 2019, we were able to expand those contracts for services and serve more families, reducing our waiting list. And so what our fiscal management reports indicate is that with that additional $6 million investment in prevention in state fiscal year 2020, what we realized was a $15 million reduction in out-of-home care costs. So when we have fewer children coming into care, we're also able to keep the children who are in care in less restrictive settings. We're able to keep children out of more expensive congregate care or residential settings. And so by really focusing those services on the front end to keep children at home with their families and to keep children in family-based settings, even when they do have to come into care, we're really able to see that return on investment in terms of cost. But we're also, I think what is even more important is to prevent children from having to experience the trauma of being separated from their families or having to enter the foster care system at all.
Thank you, Kristen. Senator Meredith, also, we're putting a lot of effort into comprehensive wraparound community-based services so that our children that usually will go into residential care may have a team around them with that family in the community. We're working on piloting several counties, piloted in Jefferson, in Bluegrass, and in Northern Kentucky, where those children that end up in DJJ, the Department of Juvenile Justice, or in gangs or dead, are the ones that we're targeting because they end up in residential as a way to keep them safe and others safe, as opposed to that's what they need. So we're really looking at what they need and how we can provide that in community as opposed to in residential care. And I don't know if Krista mentioned, but we had a 96% reduction in residential care of the youth that participated in the Family First. So all of our residential partners are looking at intensive, comprehensive wraparound services to be an alternative to residential. We will always need residential for some children, but not for the many as we have had. We've been on a downward trend, and we want to continue to do that.
You make reference to a waiting list. Are those children waiting for services? Is that included in this 9,122 number that we have on slide 3?
No, sir, it is not included in that 9,122 children. The waiting lists are for, and that we've experienced in the past, were for family preservation services. And so referrals are made to that program for children who are at imminent risk of removal. So without those intensive in-home services, we are not able to mitigate the risk factors that would require them to come into care. So when we have waiting lists sometimes, and we can't access resources or access immediate intensive services, sometimes the only alternative in the past was to bring children into out-of-home care. So potentially of that 9,122, there could be children reflected in that number that came into care while there were waiting lists in that area of the state. But with the additional investment of prevention dollars and the ability to also leverage federal funding now for prevention, we have been able to eliminate the vast majority of those waiting lists. We do still have a few pockets in the state that have small waiting lists, but we are planning to be able to eliminate those completely in this next state fiscal year with the availability of additional prevention funding.
I think there's a pretty broad consensus both in the House and Senate that we need more social workers. I don't think we can argue that point. But what I'm concerned with, and this may be a discussion for another day that we need to have, is again those measurements of success. Because again, on your overview, you talk about reducing poverty, which in turn should reduce the number of children that are at risk. Well, we're not seeing a substantial reduction of that. I know there's various reasons for it, but I think we need to really come to terms as to what our long-term goal is in terms of real numbers in trying to improve the state of the nation, so to speak, for Kentucky. You know, if I had nothing other than slide 3 to go by, I would say we're not doing a really good job. All we're doing is kind of hamsters in a wheel, and we just keep them spinning. I think we need to have something a little bit more concise.
We share your concern. That's why we want to build the infrastructure and bring the content expertise that is needed for this young workforce. In addition, we're really looking at measuring child abuse against ourselves so that we can look at our own progress as we go forth, and we'll be able to do a presentation on that to you at another time.
I would look forward to that because I want to see something very tangible.
We do need a higher capacity. We need to have the capacity to do the job we're tasked for. And for that, we need 50 to 76 clinical social workers who would actually come in with the expertise that we need in order to move forward.
And I agree with that. But my concern is the footprint of government keeps getting bigger and bigger. And if we're not really making an impact on the number of lives that we're impacting, then we haven't been successful. So I would look forward to that continued conversation and to see some specific measures.
All the time. Keeping kids out of residential care and out of juvenile justice and out of fatality is how we measure, how we continuously measure our work as well. We just have incredible measures in, like the amount of reporting that comes in. You know, we have state mandate reporting. So actually, Kentucky, we have to have more conversations about this.
Sure, I appreciate that. Representative Westrom, you have a question? Thank you.
Wow, my head is spinning.
I noticed that.
Having been in this field for several years, I have such a great passion for it. I do have a question about what is the average age of your frontline social worker? You may not have that information, but if you could let us know that down the road, that would be very helpful. You know, of course, the younger they are, the greater impact emotionally it has on them. And I don't know if there have been any long-term studies on their mental and physical health after serving in this position. It would have to be very traumatizing.
Well, and Senator Westrom, we also measure, what we're measuring is the amount of experience, and the majority of our staff right now have less than 1 year, 40%. Wow. Now, these are complex cases that me as a clinical person who's done with trauma would not carry more than 12 or 15. These are folks without experience carrying pretty damaging, traumatic experiences with our clients. So that is a concern, and we thank you for your understanding of that. And I do not know that, but we will get that information to you.
I'm sure
as to the average age.
There has to be a lot of post-traumatic stress that goes along with that for this population. I'd like to, in the old days, we used to know the average number of placements a child had. Do we have that kind of information anymore? They used to be in residential. They go through the foster care system until that failed repeatedly, and then they'd go into residential care. I don't know what the path is at this point.
We do have that number. I don't have it on hand,
Okay.
But we will get that to you. Thank you.
It's astounding, a 96% reduction in residential care.
Krista can probably respond to that a little bit better with regards to our numbers and reduction of residential care.
So I think that 96% refers to the success of our prevention services. So our prevention services that we provide under Family First, which is those evidence-based practices that are approved for use by the Federal Clearinghouse, result in between 93 and 96% of children remaining safely at home with their families.
So
another part.
I have a question about that. What is the timeline, the average timeline for a family who are in preventive care? How long does that activity, on average, take?
So we utilize a number of evidence-based practices that each have their own timeline. They are tailored for different ages of children. But the maximum length of time without an additional approval is 12 months. That is established by the federal law under Family First. So beyond 12 months, it requires that family, that you go through the documentation again to establish that child is a candidate for foster care. But it would be highly unusual for those prevention services to last beyond 12 months anyway. But each evidence-based practice has its own specific requirements and length of service and is approved for specific age groups. But the maximum is 12 months.
And I just have one more question. I've had concern throughout the whole COVID season that we've been through for the last 2 years. And I know that the safety net had to be just stretched as far as it could be for rent assistance, utility assistance. How did you see a dramatic increase of the need to cover a large number of families just to keep them in their homes with utilities during this time?
Saw an increase in food needs as well as utility needs. Like I said, SNAP, the SNAP program, we served 70,000 people more than the year before.
Okay.
So yes,
That says
increase
it.
in all needs. Families who never needed us during COVID.
I'm grateful for that safety net. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Westrom. We still have 3 people in the queue. Please note the time. We're almost a quarter till. We're going to adjourn by 11:30. We'll be a little bit challenged, but I have in the queue Representative Moser, Centerberg, and then Representative Prenti. Then we'll move on to the next presentation. So, Representative Moser, please feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. This is a very busy presentation. You've been very busy doing great work, and I do appreciate all that you have focused on in terms of staffing and kind of updating the 5 pillars of how to keep kids from out of home placement. I know that there are some pilots. I think that's what you were referencing. Is this the multi-systemic therapy pilots that you're talking about? And can you just talk briefly about what those are and in terms of the really targeted treatment and efficient use of resources for families?
Thank you, Senator Moser, and thank you for your support for that. What this, yes, is multi-systemic family therapy, which is expensive, but that means that there is a team of experts, content experts that work with that family. They have a very slow caseload, very low caseload. They would work with the family directly. They're in the community no less than an hour from where the family and client lives. Therefore, if a child or a youth at 3 o'clock on a Friday night wants to run away from home or came home intoxicated or whatever, that family can actually call and that worker can have a session with that family right then and there on the weekend, etc. It has proven incredibly successful in other states. There's been a pilot in Jefferson County by Home of the Innocents who has really shown incredible outcomes for the children that would end up dead in a gang or in juvenile justice. That's targeted to those really difficult kids who have a lot of issues and a lot of trauma, and has been very successful. Now we're looking at doing a pilot in Northern Kentucky as well as in the Bluegrass region. We also do functional family therapy, which is another in-community wraparound comprehensive services. Again, we're wanting to leave residential for those who need it and for as short as possible, and be able to have comprehensive wraparound services in the community with the families, with our partners, to be the ones being able to be in community and stay in community if at all possible.
Okay, thank you. And one more, if I may. In terms of the residential treatment agencies, and their inability to really predict the needs in the community as we move from more, in-home, or out-of-home placement to keeping kids in home, which, should be the goal. But how do those residential programs, are they being brought in to really perform more of the intensive outpatient? Because, they're not going to survive if,
Yeah, you're right. Those conversations have been had from day one that I got here. They were had before I got here, but very intentional since I got here. And what we're working with them is what else can you provide that we need. For example, sexually reactive youth. We're always going to need residential help for that. So they're looking at those, and they're also looking into moving. For example, the Children's Home of Northern Kentucky and Home of the Innocents are two beautiful examples of residential getting out, reducing residential and moving into multi-systemic therapy with us. So this is a joint collaboration, a conversation. We told them this is going to be a 3 to 4 year process. Start looking at your budget, start looking at reframing at intensive community-based services models. And that's how we ended up where we are today. They're very much part of the conversation and on board in regards to moving into community services and reducing residential care.
Thank you.
I made presentations to their boards. I use Spiritus in 7 counties as well as to why this is needed. So they have been part and are part of the ongoing conversation, and are being very creative and very responsive.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I think that those are some really tangible ways that we can see the needle move in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Burr, you have a question?
I do, sir. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say thank you for this presentation. It's extremely interesting. I have one observation and one question. My observation from personal experience, and this was several years ago, was that in certain situations, it is almost impossible to remove a child from a home, and a home that the child needs to be removed from. I have an experience where Child Protective Services literally 7 times came into a home, 7 times decided that child was safe when that child clearly wasn't. So even though I appreciate and applaud the effort to maintain residential services, I just want a warning out there that there are times when it is much in the interest of this child not to be in that home. And I just want to make sure we don't lose track of that. My second question, which is really my question, do we keep track of the children who go into state custody? Do we track those children to see what percentage of them complete high school, what percentage of them go on to get any sort of higher education relative to children who aren't in state custody? Because to me, that would be, one marker of long-term success, that these children are getting educated and being put in a position where they're going to be able to take care of themselves as adults. Do we keep track of that at all?
We do track outcomes and those types of measures for youth who leave foster care at 18, or if they extend commitment and leave care after age 18. So there are a number of things that we keep track of for those youth, including high school or GED completion, the rate of attendance of college, whether they have health care, whether they are able to obtain and maintain employment, and other outcomes for those youth. We do not necessarily track that. Say, for example, if a child were in care from the age of 2 to 4, we don't track it for those younger youth who have, for younger children who have been in care, but certainly for our older youth who leave the foster care system.
Thank you. Representative Prunty, you had the last question on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to clarify, did you say Family First started October 19? Is that when it was first implemented? Okay, I just want to clarify that. I commend you for your vision. Thank you for your work. I think the vision of flexibility is good. But the question has to do with slide 2, that you're responsible for delivering services and reduce poverty. How does DCBS reduce poverty?
I believe this slide refers to all of our services in Department for Community-Based Services. So not just our child welfare services, but also our family support services through the provision of public assistance, through SNAP, Medicaid. So those are some of the ways that we work to address poverty, specifically with regard to our child welfare prevention services, though. In addition to those evidence-based practices that we talked about that are specifically geared to addressing issues such as mental health, substance use, and in-home parenting skills, there are also flex funds included in those contracts for prevention services. So say, for example, that transportation is a major challenge for a family to be able to obtain and maintain gainful employment. There are flex funds that are available for use for those families with whom we are working in home to assist with perhaps a car repair or utilities or other things that are perhaps a challenge with keeping the children safely at home. So that is one of the ways that we help to address challenges associated with poverty with the families that we are working with on the child welfare side as well.
Thank you. I did home health physical therapy for 10 years, and I saw real quick that we were handing out a lot of fish, not teach people how to fish. And I feel like it needs to be collaborative between the legislature and the cabinet to reduce poverty. I think that what you're talking about, using flex funds for transportation to keep somebody in a job, is an empowering thing, and that's good. That's good. I think we need policies too. I think public assistance reform is important to try to encourage people, that can be in the workforce, and we need to get people to work. And as far as raising social workers' salaries, if we get less people receiving and more people paying into the tax base, then we can increase salaries and maybe have a decreased need for social workers because there won't be so many in the system. But those are just my comments. But thank you for your work and thank you for your answer. I think that's good. Do whatever you can to empower people. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Prunty, and thank our presenters. Appreciate the information you've given us today. There's a lot to digest in a short period of time, but we appreciate it, and I'm sure we're going to have continued dialogue. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll get an update from Commissioner Eldridge and her staff on guardianship caseloads in the Department for Aging, Independent Living. Again, this is an issue that we had in the previous biennium. If the commissioner and other presenters are here, please identify yourself for the record and feel free to proceed. And I encourage members, again, hold your questions to the end of the presentation. But certainly be cognizant of the time. We've got about 30 minutes left with 2 presentations left. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Victoria Eldridge. I'm the Commissioner for the Department for Aging and Independent Living.
And I'm Jessica Wayne. I'm the Assistant Director for the Division of Guardianship.
For the Department for Aging and Independent Living, our mission is simply to promote the welfare, dignity, and independence of older adults and individuals with physical disabilities and adults in need of a guardian. We are one of the newer departments, if you will, but I always say we are the department that you don't know you need until you have a family, loved one, or friend who is truly in need of services. As you can see here, the programs and oversight that we provide, we oversee the Older Americans Act programs, which are your senior centers. We oversee multiple boards and committees within the department. We also oversee many state general funded programs that promote independence for individuals who are aging as well as individuals who have physical disabilities. We also have the newly created Office for Dementia Services that was passed in this previous session that will be housed within the department, in addition to what I'm here to talk to you today about, which is state guardianship. So just an overview for those of you who are not familiar with state guardianship. State guardianship is a program for individuals age 18 or older. They support individuals who have a cognitive impairment that prevents their ability to make informed decisions. A state guardian is appointed due to the absence of a willing and suitable family member or friend, or the absence of resources to employ a private guardian. The individual is declared by the court to be either wholly or partially disabled. There is no decision on behalf of the department for us to determine who can or cannot come in. We have to simply follow the different district court rules and appointments that assign individuals to us. So what rights do the individuals have when they come into state guardianship, and what rights do they not have? It varies based upon each individual and their current status and what decisions they are able to competently make and what decisions they are unable to competently and safely make, such as the ability to vote, make medical decisions, manage finances, sign documents, drive, or decide where the individual may live at. This is an overview. There are a lot of things that out in the general community, state guardianship, that they think state guardianship can do. However, by law, there are things that we cannot do. State guardianship cannot force treatment, medications, or control an individual's behavior. We cannot lock up or restrain individuals. We cannot keep a violent perpetrator from harming another person or force providers to serve an individual. We cannot create resources or benefits for individuals. And despite what some individuals may think, state guardianship is not a funding agency for individuals. We only have what benefits and finances that individual has available to them. There is no secret pot of fund that state guardianship has. These individuals have the same access to resources that you and I have available. So within state guardianship, there are 4 different levels. An individual may be under full guardian, full conservator, meaning that our staff are responsible for both the personal and financial affairs of the individual. An individual may be under only personal guardianship, meaning that we only oversee their personal affairs. They may be therefore conservator and responsible for only financial affairs. I know in the media, conservatorship has gotten a lot of attention with what's been going on. So just to bring you aware to that. There are also limited guardian and limited conservator, meaning a judge has made the decision that state guardianship needs to step in only within specific areas of interest to that individual to keep them safe. So as we had alluded to earlier, and I know for many of you who've been here for quite some time, there have been multiple presentations done on state guardianship. And over the past 10 years, 11 years, we have presented on cases that have continuously gone up. Because of COVID, for the first time in state guardianship history, our cases have decreased. Courts were not open to open generally. They were only open for emergency guardianship appointments and for bench trials from March 20th of 2020 to May 1st of 2021. The pandemic has, as we all know, has created a multitude of impacts, and specifically within state guardianship. So one of the things I want you all to look into as we are moving forward is the number of active clients we have had. And then the green line, as you'll note, are the number of deceased clients that we have, and the red line is the number of resigned clients. A resigned client is an individual in which they either have their rights reinstated by a court, or a family member or friend has stepped in and proven to the courts that they are able to make decisions on their behalf. You will notice for 2020, there were 564 deaths, which is almost 100 more than the previous year, and this was, in fact, due to COVID. Specifically, COVID-19 truly impacted state guardianship. You can see here that 24% of our population tested positive for COVID and 4% passed away. These are 180 individuals who lost their life too soon to COVID, the majority of which did live in long-term care, but I also want to recognize the significant impact that this has played on staff, as many of these individuals our guardianship staff knew for a long time or for a short time, but just want to bring this to your attention. So through the pandemic, and as we are still currently going through that, we have truly implemented multiple areas of support for staff. We have partnered with the Community Crisis Response Board to ensure that everyone is aware of the needs that are out there and what to do if they find themselves in crisis for our staff. We also have partnered with the Kentucky Employee Assistance Program. It is a state-run program in which our state employees, our guardianship employees, can call a 1-800 number and talk through any mental health crisis that they are going through or experiencing. We have done multiple trauma-informed care trainings on the impact of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress due to COVID. We are promoting flexibility in secondary and tertiary trauma. I know Commissioner Straub presented on that some earlier. We have also provided self-care and leadership trainings. For many of you all, as you all are leaders, we know that as leaders, we have to demonstrate self-care for others to see that it is okay. It is okay to take time off to take care of yourself. We fully recognize families come first, and we have to support our staff through this. And then we'll be starting an upcoming supervisor training on trauma and resiliency. This is coordinated on behalf of the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, and we are encouraging all of our guardianship staff to attend. And we can go back one. And just to be clear, when we talk about guardianship staff, we talk a lot about the field staff, the staff we have out in the field, but we also have staff who are processing benefits and on the fiduciary side of the house. And some of our fiduciary and benefit staff, they're not in the field, but they have tertiary trauma. They are processing the death certificates. They are processing all of the financial pieces, all of the behind-the-scenes paperwork that you don't see. So there are a lot of tertiary exposure, and we recognize that they need as much support as what our field staff do. So what does this look like? What does guardianship look like across the state? These are the number of current cases broken up by our guardianship region. This map is a little different than what the Dcbs map is, but this gives you an idea as to how many cases are in each region. These regions are designed based upon the number of current guardianship cases, and there is time to time in which the regions may adapt as court cases may ebb and flow. And you'll notice the most is in the metro region, Louisville and surrounding counties, with 1,200. And all in all, there are over 4,400 cases. So where are our state guardianship individuals? They are in each of your all's communities. They are all across the state, the majority of which are between waiver residential, including the SCL Supports for Community Living waiver and the Acquired Brain Injury waiver, as well as in long-term care, including ICFs, skilled nursing, and personal care homes. We have some individuals who are currently residing out in the community. They are living active lives out in the community, and each of these levels of care are based on the least restrictive environment with the funds that each individual has available to them. Again, we have no extra pot of money for anyone to go to. This is the same resources that you and I have to make decisions for our loved ones. As we're moving forward, as we had alluded to earlier, the courts are opening back up. We are starting to see our new appointments increase. You can notice that they almost double from January to May. We anticipate, at the time this presentation was submitted, we were at the end of June, so we did not have those numbers, but we anticipate that June's numbers will have increased as well. So what is the impact on staff with the number of cases that are increasing across the state? So you will see that we did add 10 new staff in from 2018 to 2019. There was a small increase within our guardianship budget. However, we have seen a decrease in staff turnover. Now, personally, I'd like to say it's because I came on as commissioner 2 weeks before the pandemic, and that's why. However, we recognize that during the pandemic, there were not a lot of individuals who were moving in between jobs during the pandemic. We had 23 resignations in 2020 and then 13 thus far in 2021. We have worked really hard to support our staff through this, and we are working even harder to bring on more staff, as we'll discuss later. So for the 4,400 guardianship individuals that have no one else to make decisions for them, again, state guardianship is there. We have 103 that are out in the field and 32 that work in Frankfurt to process benefits and fiduciary responsibilities. Due to time, I will not go through and read each of these, but just want to note that we do have checks and balances. Our field staff cannot complete inventory and issues checks. Our field staff complete inventory and then contact our fiduciary staff, who then process checks. We have complete and separate alignment of our programs to ensure there is not any ill will being done with regard to our guardianship individuals and the management of their finances and their benefits. So one of the things I am really excited to share with you all today, I know many times commissioners have come before you and said, we need help, we need help, we need help. We looked within our own cabinet and we found some help. We truly believe that with Secretary Freelander, partnerships make progress. And in December of 2020, the Department of Aging and Independent Living signed a contract with DMS to draw down a 50-50 federal match. We looked within our own data and saw that 96% of our 4,400 individuals receive Medicaid, and recognized we could, on behalf of the work our guardianship workers were doing, draw down a 50-50 match. So we can receive up to $5.7 million in additional funds because of the individuals that we're serving who are on Medicaid. Because of this drawdown, it creates 64 new guardianship positions, the majority in field and some in the benefits and fiduciary sides of the house. Positions are starting to be posted now. We will hopefully see the impact of this 50-50 federal match over the next year or 2 years, but are really, really excited that we'll be bringing on additional staff to help to bring caseloads down. And just want to note that the remaining of these funds will go towards staff training. There are some of our staff who are very active members of the National Guardianship Association, and we applaud them in their efforts, but recognize that the National Guardianship Association has high standards, and we applaud our staff who are participating in that. So if you look at the 3 colors on here, the blue line is the current caseload, and when we say caseload, this means the number of field staff, the number of benefit staff, and fiduciary staff who are currently working in combination together to support our individuals. And this is broken out by regions with the map that I had shown to you previously. And so you'll look to see kind of where those numbers were. The green is the anticipated result of when we hire on the 64 additional staff, where those caseloads will go. The national recommendation is that caseloads be at 20, meaning that they're for our guardianship, our field staff, fiduciary, and benefits combined together, that they carry 20 caseloads. So we're close. We're getting there. We're just not there yet.
With that, and I hate to interrupt your presentation, but we're really short of time.
Sure.
So given the 50-50 match, what's the ask of this committee?
You can go to the next slide. The ask of this committee is the next slide. We have done a lot of work to get there. So we were at 114 staff. The 50-50 matches at 64 individuals, which brings to a total of 178. In order to bring us to the national recommended caseload standards, we're looking at needing another 45 additional staff members to get us there, and we have worked really, really hard to get to that point. The next few slides, and I won't go over these, you can read over these, is just the focus on what we are doing internally. We are truly working on modernizing guardianship. For so long, it has been keep your head down, keep your self out of court, keep your client out of court, but we have truly implemented and working on modernizing our state guardianship system. We are providing a multitude of guardianship staff training, which have not been done before, as well as we have our first ever guardianship strategic plan, and those goals are listed on the final slide. Thank you very much, Senator Meredith, and thank you to each of the committee members for listening today.
Thank you, and I applaud the cabinet, and particularly Secretary Freelander, for looking for innovative ways to address this issue. I'm proud to see you're making some progress. But the only question I would have is, folks who serve as guardians, is that court appointed?
Are the private guardians or state guardians?
The private guardians.
So for the private guardians, Jessica, can you answer a little bit more?
Yeah, they are court appointed. They have to petition and file an application for appointment as the guardian and conservator, and it is up to the judge to determine if they qualify. Each court has a different way that they determine whether that individual is appropriate or not. Some courts do CourtNet search, do some background checks, ask some questions. Others do not, but it's up to that individual judge.
And do they receive pay for those services?
Statute allows for them to take up to a 6%, up to a 6% fee for the services that they provide.
6%
of their assets.
Okay.
So they can either take it from their income, or if they sell an asset, so if they have a larger, like a home, they can take a 6% fee of that. But that is by statute, and not all individuals do take that fee, but they can.
And the one thing that I will add to that is our state guardianship individuals, our state guardianship workers, those cases are assigned based upon their current caseload and what their expertise is. All of our state guardianship workers all have to meet standard background checks and criteria to move forward.
Certainly, I understand. Any other questions from committee or anyone virtually? If not, I hate to shortchange your time, but
That's-
great presentation,
that's
very
okay.
concise, and appreciate your work to do. And again, I'm glad to see we're making progress and not where we need to be, but getting closer. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Our last presentation for today. Excuse me while I get my notes here. This is update on funding for our Kentucky Trauma Care System, or lack thereof. I would appreciate if our presenters would introduce themselves for the record.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Dick Bartlett. I am the Emergency Preparedness and Trauma, well, actually, I'm the Trauma Coordinator now for the Kentucky Hospital Association and its foundation, the Kentucky Hospital Research and Education Foundation. And I believe on the Zoom link is Dr. Julia Kostic, who is the chairman of our Kentucky Trauma Advisory Committee. And she's also the Associate Director for the University of Kentucky's Kentucky Injury Prevention and Research Center at the University of Kentucky.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Do I load the slide, or are you driving that? Okay, I'll let him work on that. Let me begin by trying to clarify just a little bit here. That the kind of trauma that I'm talking about is different from the kind of trauma that you just heard in the two excellent presentations that went before. The kind of trauma that you have heard before is the psychological, mental types of trauma that are very often associated with the kind of trauma that I'm dealing with, but they often get confused as we look at the two, and I just wanted to make that differentiation. Now, I say that they're somewhat related because if we were to have an incident like the shooting that occurred at Marshall County High School, that kind of trauma, which is what I'm dealing with, the physical trauma that is associated with an injury or insult to the body, often will create the psychological types of trauma that the folks that you've just dealt with are dealing with and the Kentucky Community Crisis Response Board. So I need to make that clear as we begin the program. The trauma that I'm dealing with is actually defined in a statute that was passed in 2008 and modified a little bit in 12. And it talks about multi or single system injury, life-threatening injury, and the work that is done to prevent it or to mitigate it or to treat it as a result of that injury. And it's defined in the statutes 211-490. And actually, it was defined originally in 311A, which is related to another part of the law dealing with EMS and emergency medical services. But the trauma that we're dealing with, this system actually was created in 2008 with the support of Dr. Bill Hacker, who was our commissioner at the time, in order to create a system to deal with saving lives, and as a result, as we can save lives or mitigate the damage that's done by a damage to the body by an accident or an injury of some sort, it does save economic lives because we return people to productive society again. So there's a direct relationship. But the law did create a system. It did create recognized trauma centers, and it tried to create a comprehensive trauma care program that would be established by the Department of Public Health. Dr. Hacker basically said to us, Mr. Bartlett, Nancy Galvani, Mike Rust, who was our president at the time, I will birth the baby, but you guys have got to raise it because what we got was a trauma system without any money. And it talks about in the slide here, to the extent that funds are available, there was a trauma system fund established. I will tell you that there are no dollars in that fund that were generated by the general fund. The law did allow for the department to contract for services. So what essentially happened was that the cabinet, through a contract that we had at Kentucky Hospital Association and our Research and Education Foundation included the trauma care system support, and I became not only the emergency preparedness coordinator for the program, but I also, as another duty assigned, became the state trauma coordinator. So I fulfilled that trauma director's position that you saw in the previous slide. It also created a trauma advisory committee. 18 members serve without compensation. They are appointed by either the governor or by the secretary, and they serve without compensation. They could be reimbursed for travel and related expenses, but we have not had that many physical meetings because we have no budget for that. So we've been meeting virtually almost since the beginning, using the assets and resources of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. It did establish a fund, and the fund was originally intended to hold those dollars which were created either by the activities of the program or by any state funds and by other monies that were generated. Well, we were fortunate in that we did have some monies donated to the program. The Good Samaritan Foundation from the Methodist Conference here in Kentucky donated some monies which we were able to apply to various activities. The Foundation for Healthy Kentucky donated some monies. We had an initial grant from MESA, which was an ER physicians group, which got our state trauma registry signed up and funded, but we did not use this fund for that purpose. Unfortunately, the history of the panel here is that you in the history tended to go and raid these kinds of funds for balancing the general fund. And so we felt that it might not be a good idea to use some of these opportunities here through this account. So we did it through the Kentucky Hospital Research and Education Foundation, which is a 501c3. We were able to give the organizations involved the appropriate tax letters and credits that they needed. And in the case of a bequest that we got for about $250,000, it allowed the foundation to actually invest those funds while preserving the capital. And we have a substantial amount of interest that we're using now to plow back into the program for educational support and activities. So it's been a very good symbiotic relationship. The law did allow for the promulgation of regulations, and in 2012, with Dr. Hacker's support, we did promulgate a series of regulations which set up the framework for how this is organized and laid out. We do have a trauma registry, which is required by the regulations. It was established by KIPRIC using funds from MESA, and it is currently supported by funds from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration on a grant. So it is grant supported. We started out with only 3 trauma centers in the state: University of Louisville, University of Kentucky, and Kosair Children's Hospital. We are now up to 21 across the state. And as Dr. Hacker has said on several situations, and I'm not sure what we're going to do here, let me go back here and click on this one. This map, if it'll come up. Let's see here. I'm not sure what I did, Ben, but I'm going to see if this will help bring it up. Well, I'm going to try one more time. There we go. This map shows our current layout, and it also shows that we have a couple of facilities that are in development. So in addition to the 21, I've got a facility down in Warren County that's working on a level 3, which is in between. We go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Level 1 and 2 are usually academic related, medical teaching facilities or having residents in the facility. Level 3 has many of those kinds of skills and capabilities in-house 24 hours a day or available immediately on call. And a level 4 is a well-developed community emergency department with dedicated assets and resources, and it's a step up and above and beyond what you would consider a normal emergency department. So we've got 21, we've got about 3 or 4 that are in development, and I think this is an amazing progress that we've been able to make, considering that we've got a system that does not have any funds to support it. The process is that facilities have to be verified. There are standards that we have to follow. For the level 1, 2, and 3 facilities, those standards are set by the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma, and they actually come in and do a verification every 3 years of those facilities. It's a very intense and expensive proposition. We did our level 4. We developed our own criteria. We actually modeled it after some general guidance from the American College, plus some good examples we got from Tennessee, Ohio, Minnesota, and other states to create a document which gave us a good set of verification criteria, which is built into our regulations now. And it's defined in there, so it's clear, and we go in and we will verify those folks every 3 years. We have a verification team that usually includes an ER doc or a trauma surgeon, a trauma program manager, nurse manager, and usually a third person, and I have been that third person in virtually all of the cases. There are designation processes that go along with this. Once you are verified, you are then designated as part of the official Kentucky Trauma Care System. The designation becomes kind of important sometimes for third-party payers. They require you to be part of a designated system if you're going to use the billing profiles that go along with being a trauma system. We also have been very fortunate that once we have a designated trauma facility, our partners at the Kentucky Cabinet for Transportation have gone back, and where you've got the H sign that's on the highways near a trauma center, they have gone back and added at our request at no charge to our program the trauma center logo underneath that sign. So if you're driving along the Western Kentucky, for example, approaching the exit for the Senator Meredith's former hospital, there's a trauma center designation that indicates to the individual that that hospital is a trauma center, as opposed to the hospital sign that might be down the road at Ohio County. And I'm not picking on Ohio County, I'm just trying to make a designation differentiation as to what we've done to try to let the public know that this is a trauma center as opposed to other hospitals that might be in the area. We also developed a comprehensive trauma program resource manual built heavily upon our partners in Minnesota and Tennessee, and it becomes a very good guide for these folks. So they've got some instructions and information and models and samples of what forms and things should look like and how they should operate in their facility. So we do have the fund. The fund that we've got is actually today running a balance of about $38,860. Where did those funds come from? They came from those designation and verification fees. We do pay our verification team $1,000 per day. Sometimes we can get more than one verification done, but that's where those verification fees are used. And they also cover any of our other costs related to the operation of the basic program. Right now, in our contract at KHA, through KHREF, we have about $15,000 a year in there, which is used specifically targeted for paying for the fees of our site verification team. Because of the pandemic, we've only done one this last year. I've got, though, probably anywhere between 6 and 7 coming up in this fiscal year, which just started. So it's going to be a busy year, and we will use all of our allocated funds and probably some from the last allocation. So I would say about 21 to 25,000 of that 38 will probably expended this fiscal year on doing trauma site verifications. So that's how we've been able to handle that. There have been a few classes and courses that I, as a trauma coordinator, have gone to, and we also draw those out of those funds. The question may become, well, all right, you're the trauma coordinator. Where do you get paid from? I do not get paid from this fund. I am a contractor at this point. I stepped back as full-time trauma emergency preparedness coordinator and went on a part-time basis. So I'm doing trauma, and I'm doing some relationships with some of our federal partners. But I am paid through the grant that we've got and the contract that we've got through the cabinet because there's a direct relationship between trauma and emergency preparedness and being prepared for a mass casualty event and things of that nature. So the salary that I get, which is very small, about 10 hours a week is what I'm currently compensated for to deal with trauma, comes from that contract. We are not taking any funds from this. The concern at this point, which is why I've got the last slide up here, is that, I am 74, just turned 74 on the 29th. And if I were to step away and step back, there is no state employee. There is no, contrary to what it said in the earlier slide, where it talked about having a state director and a state registrar and so forth, there are no state employees in this program. We've got to create a stable, permanent foundation at some point for this trauma program. we've looked at this and we've talked about this during previous administrations, but it has just not been received at this point. So I think that's important that we bring this forward. We need to talk about the registry software. Dr. Kostic and her team are supported again by the grant from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Grants come and go. So we'd like to get some funding to support a trauma registry. We'd like to get some funding to support the data analysis and the staff that is used to deal with that, to work with all the registrars to get our data in place, analyzed, and create our reports. We're working on our 2020 report, which we should have hopefully by August from what I'm told. We do have a trauma website. We'd like to develop that. Right now it points primarily to the Kentucky Hospital Association, where I have trauma pages on the kyha.com site. We'd like to have some support for meetings, educational programs. Our regulations require a rural trauma team development course for new trauma centers and for the medical directors of existing trauma centers to keep them up to speed and keep their skills up. Advanced life support, advanced burn life support, and things of that nature. Burns are considered part of trauma. We currently have only one burn center in the state of Kentucky. One, the University of Louisville Hospital. The burn center that was part of the University of Kentucky basically stepped back. They will take burns up to about 10% in their medical ICU unit. The Norton's Burn Center will do the same with burn children. Up to that point, they get transferred out. They will either go to the University of Louisville now, or they will go south to Vanderbilt, or north to Cincinnati and Shriners Hospital, or over east towards Cobble. So, you know, we're trying to develop an additional burn life support training for hospitals to be able to support and take care of severely burned patients until we can work out arrangements for their longer-term care. To that extent, we also are doing educational programs this fall using our bequest monies. We're going to do an advanced burn life support and a rural trauma team course for hospitals in eastern Kentucky. The ABLS course is designed to provide the basic skills for hospitals in small, rural, community access and regional hospitals to be able to care for, stabilize, and prepare for transfer for the most serious patients out. And the Rural Trauma Team Development course is there to help develop new trauma centers. And we're going to replicate that, working with our healthcare coalition in eastern Kentucky. I'm talking with their coordinator about doing a similar program in the eastern part of the state, probably late fall, early winter, so we can develop additional programs for eastern Kentucky to help build the trauma system in that part of the state. We'd like to go ahead and try to get the full-time equivalent of a trauma program manager, training coordinator to kind of coordinate and manage this program. It is right now done through KHA. We would be more than willing to continue that relationship with the state. We've been good partners with them since 2006. We became an official partner in 2008, and we've continued to be that partner for the state and tried to make sure that we have a good, stable program. Minimal support for, obviously, the administrative costs to support the program. And then the bottom figure is basically tied to what we would do with our regular verifications and re-verification programs every 3 years as called for by the existing regulations. So that's the ask, Mr. Chairman, and we're just trying to create, I think, a good, solid, stable program that will help guide us into the future and make this a good trauma program that we can all be proud of in the future.
I appreciate that, Mr. Bartlett. I appreciate the work that you've done over the years with this, and I know it's been challenging at times. And just a couple observations. When you look at the map, even though we have made progress, it's not comprehensive by any means. That's worrisome. And again, I appreciate the detailed explanation on the ask, but I think what's missing from this discussion is what's the real impact of this? I mean, this has been in place since 2008. And never has been funded other than the funding sources you have mentioned. And we've survived, and why do we want to commit the money to this if it's
Well, I will tell you that, that in the preliminary report that Dr. Kostic's team is working on, there were over 13,650 trauma cases that were entered into our various trauma registries across the state.
How many again?
13,650. Actually, it's more than that. And we are still getting some of the pandemic has caused some of the registrars to be a little slow in getting their data in there. I expect that number will be several thousand more. So at least 13,500 Kentucky residents have been impacted by this trauma system, have been in our trauma centers, have been seen and stabilized by the physicians and the trauma teams that are out there. You know, in a trauma center, even a level 4 trauma center, an emergency department, you know, what you're saying is that when the EMS people bring their patient in, we try to get them to call in advance, activate a trauma code. At that point, the hospital brings together resources. They will bring in, you know, if the doctor's in another part of the hospital, they bring that back. They bring in specialists from the X-ray, from the labs, from the other parts of the hospital, and they will assemble a team in a trauma bay so that when that stretcher rolls in the back door, there's a team of people surrounding the patient at the bedside that is focused on what happened, what is wrong right now, what can we do to stabilize that patient and create the best outcome possible. It's really a sight to behold when you see what one of these teams looks like and what they're really involved with in terms of trying to help engage that patient. And we try to make a decision. We talk about the golden hour. The trauma teams at the level 4 facilities try to make a decision to either transfer that patient out or to keep that patient within about 20 to 30 minutes. That's an awful lot of information that they've got to process and assemble, x-rays and scans that they've got to get together, tests that they've got to run. And if they make that decision that it's got to go, then that next process starts. We've got to get that ambulance crew back in. We've got to make sure that patient is packaged and ready. We've got to make connections with a level 3, 2, or 1 facility down the line. If it's really bad, it may have to be flown, which may mean we may have to scramble an aircraft to come in and pick up that patient and package it and fly it to a distant level 1 or level 2 trauma center or a burn center. So there's an awful lot that goes on that makes a difference. And like I said, over 13,000 people were impacted in 2020, and that's the preliminary numbers. It's not the final number.
And I think that's what's missing from the presentation today, Mr. Barton. It's not a criticism of you. We want to give you a limited amount of time to do this. But, you know, that 13,000, that is a sizable number. We'd be curious of what the cost associated with that 13,000 is. Because what I'm looking for is how we can impact this to truly save the Commonwealth and our citizens' funds. And we know by not having a comprehensive trauma center, we're missing that opportunity. Now, your ask, I don't think is substantial at all. And I hate to ask you to come back every 2 years to try to do this, but we need to educate, I think, our legislator as to why this is important for Kentucky. It's a matter of coincidence. A good friend of mine stopped by my community last Friday who happened to grow up in Litchfield, Kentucky. He worked at my hospital as a respiratory therapist, became a trauma surgeon, is now head of the trauma center in Georgia, their network.
Excellent.
And he talked about the work that they have done. They fund theirs through speeding tickets, double the fee, and they get $23 million a year.
The Georgia program is outstanding, and we've looked at several ways in order to fund the trauma system. I will tell you that the distracted driving law, which the General Assembly passed a number of years ago, the original proposal for the fees coming from the distracted driver law were targeted at supporting our trauma care system. But, you know, at the time, the General Assembly chose to, you know, we need to do that for balancing the budget in other areas. So that moved off.
Again, I think where we're missing the opportunity is if we spend this, we can save this. But we haven't documented that today. So I think maybe we want to give this another shot in the future before we go into session. But I think we have to make that case before we can even consider this.
Knowing that we had a short period of time and there was a second ask of us and Kiprick, we are also scheduled to appear on July the 21st at 3 before the Medicaid Oversight and Advisory Committee, and Dr. Kostic is working on some specific PowerPoints and data presentations for that committee to talk more about the fiscal impact and the potential savings and relationship of the trauma system to the Medicaid costs and so forth. So there's be more of that, I think, coming in the next presentation.
As you're aware, I'm co-chair of that committee, and I made that request. But specifically, what I want you to focus on is how, if we have a comprehensive trauma network, it can save the Medicaid program money. But with that, Senator Berg, you have a question? Senator Berg?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say thank you for this presentation. To me, this is extremely personal because I have worked in a level 1 trauma center, over the last 40 years. So I'm on the receiving end of everybody who comes into the state. And I also am very aware of the importance of the data in the trauma registry. I think that is absolutely essential data. I have used it. It is available for the state to use. What I want to know, and I think this echoes the question that the chair just asked, do we have enough data in that trauma registry to calculate the cost of trauma to the state of Kentucky?
I'm going to let Doc.
Blunt trauma and for penetrating trauma.
Dr. Kosich, are you available online? Because you're the expert
Yes.
on the registry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the trauma registry data by statute are de-identified, which means that we have encounters of care, but not lengthwise patient data that allow us to track patients from the scene of injury through, for example, rehabilitation and re-employment. We can estimate in some cases what the costs and benefits are, but in the absence of individually identifiable data, we can't actually run the numbers. That is a benefit of the trauma registry in that privacy and confidentiality are protected, but it's a detriment when we try to quantify benefits.
Anything else, Senator Berger?
So are we able to at least estimate if the average cost of an automobile accident with this and this type of injury? Are we able to at least get an estimate of what we're spending on trauma in the state on an annual basis?
For patients in trauma system facilities, we can make those estimates. We've never actually tried because it would take many hours and a lot of computer resources, and we don't have a budget for them. But we can certainly have a shot at it. For the state as a whole, we look at statewide injury data that are available in the state hospital discharge data system, with which I'm sure some of you are familiar. That information source is also largely de-identified.
But I would think though that our MCO partners could provide us with some information with that regard. I mean, since they're processing the claims and it has to be coded appropriately, that they could probably make a reasonable estimate for us. But we'll attempt to do that. But we need truly to try to identify that the best that we possibly can. Representative Bentley, you have a question, Representative Bentley?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was looking at this map, at first I thought, well, Eastern Kentucky's kind of covered with Schedule 4, but then I realized, like up in Greenup where I'm from, you have trauma in Cabell and St. Mary's. So do they get Kentucky patients? Is that in your statistics of the 16,000 or 13,000?
No, the patients who go out of state do not appear in the Kentucky Trauma Registry. Only the patients cared for in the hospitals noted on this map are in the registry.
Okay. Then it was mentioned if they were from Eastern Kentucky, they go to Cobble.
We do have situations where burns, for example, are going to Cobble Huntington from that area out there, though some are transferred by helicopter towards the University of Louisville, Vanderbilt, and north towards Cincinnati. A lot of the children have been going north to Shriners in Cincinnati, which is now moved over towards Dayton.
Yeah. I worked with ARIVAC. My daughter was a nurse prac on that, so I understand how Cabell and St. Mary's work that. Thank you for your
burn beds are very expensive to sustain, and so that's why so many of these burn centers are beginning to shut down. It's just very expensive. I really take my hat off to Dr. Smith and the team at the University of Louisville who chose to go in the opposite direction. He wanted to take and make a difference when he became chief medical officer down there. He and I spent some time talking about that, and they expanded and grew that program. And I'm encouraging them. They are working towards becoming an accredited burn center, because Vanderbilt and University of Cincinnati are not accredited. And I said, make yourself head and shoulders above the rest so that you stand out as one of the quality premier burn programs in this part of the country. There are very few burn beds in the state, and that's why we're also promoting advanced burn life support programs to help the small rural and regional hospitals to increase their ability to take care of these people until, if they are really bad, we can find a bed, and that bed may be in another state. It could be North Carolina, Ohio, we don't know.
Mr. Bartlett, I appreciate your presentation today. Obviously, we need to do some work on this. We'll look forward to your presentation, Medicaid oversight. I think there's a little work that needs to be done, but I appreciate you presenting today and being part of this. So before we adjourn, just reminded our next committee meeting will be August 4th. And for members who want to participate remotely, you'll be provided with a Zoom link as well as downloading the information for that meeting. And is there any other business to come before this committee? If not, entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion and a second. We stand adjourned. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.